Good morning again. I rarely use the word hate, but I hate going to the dentist. Likewise, I reserve the word love for very special relationships, and I love my dentist in a purely professional way. If I need a root canal or other hideous dental procedure, which I have on a number of occasions, he is my go-to guy. But we have one annoying area of disagreement about what makes certainly not a pleasant, but at least a bearable experience. When I am scheduled for a more agonizing appointment, the staff puts me in one of their special rooms, designed for more lengthy stays. You need to know that my mental state involves memories of childhood visits to the dentist, in which I always surreptitiously eased my neck off the back of the headrest to be sure they didn't chain me to the chair when they clipped that bib on with the metal clips. I was convinced that they were ensuring that I could not bolt and run at any time. Fast forward to my adult dental nightmares. To ease his patient's mental state, my dentist hits the button that allows the chair to glide into a position that, in my mind, is comparable to the angle that astronauts always assumed prior to blastoff into unknown space. And directly overhead, in the only line of vision now available to me, is a sleek video monitor that is immediately activated with soothing music and swirling colors. This soon fades into some bucolic scene of nature with a combination of glorious creatures swimming in the ocean or grazing on the savanna or congregating at that most dreaded natural setting, the waterhole. Now, I have watched enough National Geographic nature specials to anticipate the carnage lurking behind a rock, under the seaweed, or perched on the next hill. And even if I could somehow warn the unsuspecting digital victims of the fate about to befall them, the rubber dam and metal clamps inserted into my mouth render all vocalization impossible without drowning in saliva. So each time I have the unfortunate luck of spending at least an hour in the chair, the dentist and I go through the same dance. He turns on the video. I explain, again, that this video experience does not help me go to that happy place in my mind. He comments about the beauty of the photography and the nature of nature to be cruel at times. I reply that the color of the blood being spilled is indeed vibrant, but that I prefer to not have it virtually drip on me as I wait for the scream of the drill to drown out the musical accompaniment to the slaughter overhead. I usually repeat this process with a technician who comes to check on me and realizes, heaven forbid, that the video monitor is dark. She springs into action to be sure that those wildebeests get a good drink before being set upon by whatever creature can gnaw on their bony carcasses, as I now have to try to pantomime my aversion to overhead death and destruction. The dentist and I have now abbreviated this whole process. He reaches for the video switch. I raise a warning finger, and before I speak, he backs away. At the most recent visit I had, after the usual dance, he fanned out the magazines that were available in the room and asked if I would like to read any of those while I awaited my agony. That was not his word. I just happened to pick out the publication from the University of Miami, which happened to be his alma mater, and it proved to be very interesting. I read about a number of very innovative programs, and when I reached the final pages where scholarly books and articles were listed, one book caught my eye. The book was titled The Bonobo and the Atheist: In Search of Humanism Among the Primates by Frans de Waal. I thought it was fate that while trying to escape the brutality of nature, I came across a book documenting the humanism of animals. It helps to know that the bonobo is an endangered great ape and one of the two species making up the genus Pan. The other is the common chimpanzee. Frans de Waal, a Dutch PhD primatologist and ethologist, is the author of many books and articles and is the C.H. Candler Professor at Emory University and director of the Living Links Center at the Yerkes National Primate Research Center in Atlanta, Georgia. As soon as they released the chain from around my neck, I beat a hasty path home and ordered the book. The blurbs on the back cover of the book were even more intriguing. According to NPR, de Waal puts emotions front and center in his account of human morality and explains how that morality emerges out of animal roots. The New Republic Review states that Duvall explores for the first time the implications of his work with primates for our understanding of modern religion. Duvall finds evidence for the seeds of ethical behavior and seeks a bottom-up explanation of morality that emphasizes our unique connection with animals. This is both new and not so new thinking. The not so new goes all the way back to Charles Darwin's revolutionary work on evolution. Darwin argued for mental and moral evolution, not only physical evolution. He was unapologetically anthropomorphic. In other words, animals were capable of reasoning, displaying emotion, and could demonstrate moral behavior much like their later human relatives. In his article, Darwin and Animal Behavior, R.A. Boakes of the University of Sydney points out that Darwin argued that various species exhibited examples of altruistic behavior, and that, in Darwin's words, the difference in mind between man and the higher animals, great as it is one of degree, not of kind. Other pioneers of evolutionary theory, however, failed to connect physical evolution and moral evolution through natural selection, and so they relied on the concept of supernatural intervention that had been applied to some human ancestor, a sort of scientific version of God and Adam. Historically, much of the study about the connection between humans and animals focused on chimpanzees as the model for human ancestry. Most of what we know about chimpanzee communities and behavior is a result of over 55 years of study by Dame Jane Goodall, now 83 years old, and with a new documentary out that is supposed to be fabulous. Her work in the Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania began in 1960 and revealed that it isn't only human beings who have personality, who are capable of rational thought and emotions like joy and sorrow. She also observed behaviors such as hugs, kisses, pats on the back, and even tickling, what we consider human actions. Goodall insisted that these gestures are evidence of the close, supportive, affectionate bonds that develop between family members in these communities and other individuals, which can persist throughout the lifespan of more than 50 years. But Goodall also found an aggressive side of chimpanzee nature at Gombe Stream. She discovered that chimps will systematically hunt and eat smaller primates. Even more startling and disturbing was the tendency for aggression and violence within chimpanzee patriarchal troops. Goodall observed dominant females deliberately killing the young of their other females in the troop to maintain their dominance and even practicing cannibalism. She says of this revelation, during the first 10 years of the study, I had believed that the Gombe chimpanzees were, for the most part, rather nicer than human beings. Then suddenly we found that chimpanzees could be brutal, that they, like us, had a darker side to their nature. And for decades, this view of our evolutionary destiny remained dominant. Frans de Waal also began his study of primates in chimpanzee colonies. But when he first saw bonobos in a zoo in Holland, he says, in an interview on a Nova 2007 edition, he immediately knew they were different than the chimps he had been studying. Just by looking in their eyes, he sensed that they were more sensitive, more sensual, not necessarily more intelligent, but had a higher emotional awareness of each other and also of people who look at them. Now, chimpanzees and bonobos share a common evolutionary ancestor with humans. In fact, both species share about 98% of our DNA. Yet the bonobos are known as the hippies of the primate world, the primates who make love, not war. A lot. De Waal discovered that they were much more sexual in everything they did, including reconciling after fights, perhaps the earliest instance of make-up sex. In fact, bonobos are so sexual that they are rarely on display in zoos because their sexual activity that closely resembles human sexuality makes visitors extremely uncomfortable. The sexual activity of the bonobos added a sensual element to de Waal's research. But what really interested him was how the bonobos have a much more peaceful society because they are much less violent than chimpanzees. And did I mention they are a matriarchal community? Before the study of bonobos uncovered this more empathetic side of our primal ancestors, the research supported a rather negative view of our evolutionary nature. In other words, de Waal says, everything we do negatively is associated with our biology, and everything we do that is nice, or when we are altruistic and empathetic, We don't blame that on anything. We claim that as our own unique human nature. The stories out of Gombe on chimpanzees confirmed that negative biological view that we have of ourselves as purely competitive, purely aggressive. But the bonobos didn't fit that view. Duvall's studies led him to document in bonobo society and individual behaviors those pillars of morality: empathy and the desire to console one another, pro-social behaviors like sharing, and reciprocity and fairness. We can get a sense of the bonobos' empathy and sensitivity and how they differ from chimps by a historical record that recounts that during the Allied bombardment in Munich, Germany in World War II, all the chimps in a nearby zoo survived, but all the bonobos died of heart failure. As early as the 1970s, Japanese scientists challenged the belief that we are killer apes as they documented the peaceable communities of bonobos. They related not only do different bonobo groups mingle, but they have sex together, the kids play together, they groom each other, and sometimes they travel together. Duvall says that this all was absolutely shocking and didn't fit the image we had of where we came from. And he says, it was totally ignored. It's very interesting, he says, but when something doesn't fit your thinking, the best way to deal with it is to shove it out the window and ignore it. And that's what the scientific community did for about 20 years. The Nova interviewer challenges Duvall by noting that our propensity for war and violence seems to place us much more on the evolutionary branch of the chimpanzees. But Duvall says that if we look only at our warfare and territoriality, it's easy to compare ourselves to the chimps. But, he says, that's only one side of what we do. We also trade, we intermarry, we allow each other to travel through our territory. Well, at least we used to. Duvall goes on to say that we have a long tradition in the West of looking at our morality, our human civilization, so to speak, as conquering nature. Nature's bad, our human nature is bad, but if we work very hard at overcoming it, we can become a little bit better. He calls this Calvinist biology because it is based on the idea of original sin that we need to struggle against in order to strive for the perfectibility of human nature. It is one rationale for why we need religion to offer either a carrot of salvation or a club of damnation to contain our naturally bad tendencies. It's why some would question how someone who is an atheist or even an agnostic can be good without some universal system of moral behavior imposed from above. Duvall thinks that if we study the primates, we notice a lot of these things that we value in ourselves, such as human morality, and they have a common connection with our evolutionary roots in primate behavior. If you start thinking of our biological roots as moral beings, that gives a completely different view of ourselves than that we have a nasty genetic heritage that we need to overcome. The Nova interviewer presses Duvall, and he wants him to make a choice asking whether he thinks we're more bonobo or more chimp. Duvall answers that we're both, but he knows that's not a satisfying answer. He clarifies that in his opinion, there are people in this world who like hierarchies. They like to keep people in their place. They like law enforcement. And they probably have a lot in common with, let's say the chimpanzee. Sound familiar? He goes on to say, and then you have other people in this world who root for the underdog. They give to the poor. They feel the need to be good. And they maybe have more of this kinder bonobo side to them. Our societies are constructed around the interface between those two. When I told Ann a couple of weeks ago that my sermon was that the bonobos were the UUs of the primate world, it was this last description of their behavior, not, as Ann said, their tendency to have sex like 800 times a day. Let's remember that we are about 6.5 million years away from when humans, chimpanzees, and bonobos split from their common ancestor. So we have made some progress in controlling our sexuality. And of course, there is no owl curriculum in primate communities. I was intrigued to think that survival of the fittest could come from the ancestor with the greatest ability to resolve disputes to the mutual benefit of all. That we might distinguish ourselves not through dominance, but through the ability to cooperate and non-violently overcome obstacles. However, I have to admit that I have seen some brawls on the floor of the Senate and the House of Representatives, but thankfully, I have not witnessed any orgies, at least not in public. In other praise for Duvall's book, a review in Psychology Today notes that Duvall isn't telling religious people that they're wrong to love their fellow humans and non-humans, because God tells them to. He's just explaining why the rest of us feel the same way, whether we believe God speaks to us or not. Anyway, I appreciated the irony that in my desperation to avoid gazing on the video segments depicting the gnashing of antelope legs and the gulping of baby turtles, I came upon this explanation that while nature at times is cruel, maybe one of our nearest primate relatives can not only teach us something about empathy and compassion, but can inspire us to see in our own nature those pillars of morality that spring from within our genetic heritage.